Hello, everyone. Today we're going to start with the assignment discussion for Unit 31, Employee Relations. We went through all the 4 learning outcomes of this assignment in the previous lectures last week. For today's assignment title, it says Employee Relations and Employee Relationships. We spoke about what employee relations are. So in our previous lectures, we spoke employee relations are basically the relationship between the employer or the manager and the employees, and how we can foster the relationship between them and have a harmonious relationship so that they both can function, together and work towards the common goal, which is essentially the organization's goals and profiting the organization as a whole. I have to read a lot of today's lecture because there's a lot of information that I can't really deviate from. Going to quickly read through this and then explain how to approach the assignment. If you guys have any doubts, then you can let me know. And all right, let's start. So for an organization to function effectively, and if high performance is to be achieved and conflict avoided, the relationship between the management and employees or employee representatives needs to be harmonious and constructive. HR practitioners and managers need to understand the nature of employment relationship and the issues that can arise in developing and maintaining positive employee relations. In our LO3, we spoke about how it's important to maintain a positive employee relation. So how that can happen is through avoid conflict in the first go itself and not, get it out of proportion. So I gave an example of 2 associates who are working in the call center and how, they started with such a small issue or a small conflict and how that grew out of proportion and ended up in them getting terminated, but also the managers getting terminated because no action was taken in the start. So it starts from a small little seed wherein if the manager can recognize that in the beginning, or the employer, and be like, you know what, the simplest, in that case, I mentioned the simplest solution was literally just move their seats, make them sit separately. That was the simplest solution that we could come up with, right? Obviously, the manager did not take action in the first go and kept dragging it for months, and that's why it went so out of proportion. So it's important to maintain a positive relation between the employees as well, and not just the employer and the employee. In an increasingly competitive and globalized world where management and employee contractual relationships, needs, and expectations and interests are constantly changing and evolving, understanding the nature of the employment relationship becomes essential. Obviously, we spoke about this as well. There are continuously changes happening. A good example that'll be there, that outside things that might matter, sorry, is basically how COVID affected the working style. So before, no one really thought that all of the associates can actually sit at home and get their work done sitting in the comfort of their room. And COVID changed that drastically. In fact, after COVID, nowadays, if there is no hybrid working model or there's no flexible working model, employees might not even think of applying for a specific job role because they'll be like, you know what, I can actually do the same job from the comfort of my house. Why am I supposed to travel so much, put in extra money for fuel, wear uncomfortable clothes and actually sit up at work and then do the same thing that I can do at home, right? So that's how things constantly change and evolve, and how the business needs to adapt to them. Because if you don't adapt to them, then in the race of actually moving forward, you might just be stagnant, and that won't work as a business model. So it's crucial for line managers and those who are responsible for developing and implementing employee relations strategy and policy have insight and knowledge of the area of employee relations. So that is why I keep saying this. I think I said this in the previous lecture as well. People management is such an important task. So people that are in high positions or leaders or, the top cream of the, management crowd, if they don't know how to manage people well, then the entire business model as a whole might collapse. For example, a manager managing six associates, all right, he needs to have those skills to actually make sure that he's assigning work to all 6 of them, doing his own work, helping them if they need, his support, and making sure that all of his associates under him are motivated and continuously want to strive and do better. Just an example, I think I mentioned this, how, my manager previously supported me. They send me for, employment law lectures so that, I can upskill myself. So these are little things that me as an associate might not really recognize, but my manager might actually see potential, and that's why it's doing that. And also helps in fostering the relationship between a manager and an employee, and also just builds the rapport. They understand each other, and that's helpful. So people management is really important, and for them to have employee relationship skills is also very crucial. So for this unit, basically, we're going to develop how the understanding of employment law is gone into a wider external context, and how it influences the relationship and priorities in employee relations system. As I mentioned in, I think it was LO4 that I mentioned it in, this example of an associate who was not being paid fairly, and she requested for the salary benchmarking. Remember, I gave this example wherein because of her, there were 56 other associates that just got involved in this case. And it was such an ER issue because it started from just one associate, wherein she said, you know what, I feel I'm not being paid sufficient enough. I need a salary benchmarking, system done again. I want my salary to be analyzed according to the market rate, and for me to be paid fair, because I feel that I've been putting a lot of work. Obviously, her salary was not at par with the market rate, and she made it an issue because she realized that people who are just joining in an organization are getting paid way above compared to what, someone who's getting that was joined like before COVID or 5 years before. She basically involved the unions. She involved different other associates, leaders, managers, and it went out to be such a big issue, which could have just been sorted out by just making sure that she was getting paid enough or getting bonus, timely bonus, and also bonus compared to her other associates. So I mentioned this, each manager has a pool of, probably, you have 100 rupees or 1,000 rupees. They are supposed to allocate that fund to all of the people working under them. So if there are 6 associates, the manager can be like, you know what, everyone's at a similar pay. Let me just equally distribute the money. Or they can recognize that there is one associate who's working at a really low pay, whereas another one who's at very high pay. So probably give a little more in terms of bonus to the one who's getting paid less, so that at the end, maybe after 5-6 years, the gap that was there between both those associates just narrows down. Aspects such as communication mechanisms and conflict management are important in building and maintaining positive employee experiences, effective relationships, and higher levels of performance. Again, went through all of these in LO2 and LO3, how it's important to manage conflict in the first go, keep a positive relationship between employees and also their experiences in the organization. For this, we mentioned you can take, stay interviews, surveys from them, feedback sessions wherein, you can ask them that, what's going wrong, what's going right. And if they give suggestions, we listen to them as managers or as employers and, give them solutions to their problems, essentially. And also motivate them to perform better and higher. So basically, at the end of this, we need how you can have problem-solving skills and professional capabilities, and also the ability to make evidence-based judgments on people management issues generated through insight and evaluation on the employee relationship specialist area. So essentially, in this assignment, what we're going to do is you're going to use the skills that we discussed and learned throughout all of the different learning outcomes, and how you can now think about these issues through a people management style. So now just in your head, you are the HR personnel or you are the managers, and you are going to give different ideas or, just solutions to the ER issues that come up. For general information, we've been through this general information in the previous assignment discussion as well for Unit 32. Going to quickly run through this again and refresh your memory. So again, you can use the LMS, which is learner management system called Moodle. They have all of the information over there. All of these resources that I'm discussing and using in terms of presentation and this little Word document as well is going to be uploaded or is uploaded on Moodle already. Look through all of the information, read through your assignment brief and unit specification document really properly before you approach this assignment, so that you know that you're covering all of the learning outcomes, and also your grades are divided into pass, merit, and distinction. So if you're looking for a pass, of course, feel free, just go through all of the pass sections and get your pass grade. If you're looking at a grade higher than a pass, basically a merit or a distinction, under this, after this, all of this information, at the end of this Word document, the box is there, which distinguishes what things you need to approach so that you get a distinction. Whereas the assignment, the unit specification document, sorry, has the same information as well. So everything's uploaded on Moodle. And then for this assignment, you're basically producing a minimum of 3,000 words. Make sure that you're using Harvard referencing correctly. We spoke about what Harvard referencing is. We spoke about how you can use Harvard referencing correctly. I think we mentioned that, you can use the software which is inbuilt in Word for Harvard referencing. Just make sure you're choosing the option for Harvard. Whereas I mentioned there was a site online which said MyBib, which essentially, if you put the link or, the link to the ebook or the link to the website from where you took the information, I would suggest don't take websites that, are not or don't have a correct author or are not labeled correctly, because in Harvard referencing, you might not be able to reference the author correctly, and that would show up in the plagiarism system. We use Turnitin again, just making sure that you guys remember this. So plagiarism cannot be more than 20%. So you might as well just make sure that you're referencing your work correctly and using correct, websites instead of using dodgy websites. I spoke how Google Scholar can help a lot. Just type on Google Scholar, any information that you're looking for. You're looking for employee relations, type that in. You're looking for a specific topic inside the employee relations or, the learning outcomes, type that in, and you'll get different, assignments and ebooks basically on that specific topic that can be really helpful for your assignment. Okay, moving forward. Again, just reminding you, 3,000 words. You can go 10% over or under the limit, so that's absolutely fine. But just make sure that you're using all of, the correct format. You are using the, the same text throughout the entire document. You have correct spacing, you have line spacing done. So make sure that those are the basic information that, I'm just refreshing your memory on. For the second assignment that I'm going to discuss, I won't go through, take so much time to go through all of that. Spoke about Harvard referencing for plagiarism. So as you know that plagiarism is taken very seriously here at UK Versity. So make sure that you're firstly referencing your work correctly, but also you have to submit a declaration form. So make sure you find that declaration form on Moodle and then submit it with your assignment. Just if you reference your work correctly, you don't have to worry about plagiarism at all. Because in Turnitin, what happens is, if you feel that, the headings and such basic things are getting coming up on the software and getting plagiarized, so we're going to avoid that and not take that as plagiarism. But of course, if there's a whole paragraph that you've been taken from the internet and not paraphrased it, so I explained to you last time what paraphrasing is. It's essentially changing the information that you find on the internet or on an ebook or, any source of information where you find, you're changing it in your own words, and you are basically writing it down in your assignment on how you would think that topic looks like. So when I look at, say an accident scene, 2 cars have come, they dashed each other, someone was injured. That's my take on the accident. Someone else's take on the accident would be that this car was standing, it's the other one's fault, that's why both of them dashed, and both of them are injured now, So how you see something from your eyes, that's how you need to write it down, and that's what paraphrasing essentially means. So there are a few websites that are listed down that can really be helpful. Apart from this, I mentioned there's CIPD, that's going to be helpful. There are a few HR websites that I mentioned last time as well. On Google Scholar, you'll find most of the information. So these are a few of the books that are there as well. The 4th edition Williams, which is really going to be, this book's really good, Introducing Employment Relations. I used to use this a lot. So make sure you're using all of the information that's provided over there. These are the different websites. SHRM is also a really good website, actually. It's the full form, I think, is Society for Human Resource Management. It has so much information there. And in terms of definitions, it's got, a book a pool of all definitions over there. So what you can do is you can take that definition. Obviously, you can't really paraphrase the definition always, but make sure you're referencing it correctly so it wouldn't show up on the software. It also explains specific topic really well and crisply. So make sure that you're going through that. It'll be really useful. All right, coming on the actual what the assignment is and the scenario, I'm going to quickly explain you how to approach it so that when you're doing it, you wouldn't have any doubts. Just give me a second. Perfect. So we went through LO1 and LO2 last week. So for LO1, we spoke about how the changes and development in society, the work context and employment have influenced the employment relations. In that learning outcome, we spoke about different business units and how that a specific, a change or a development in a society, how can it affect a small business, an MNC, a gig economy? And, we discussed about, small changes that can influence a small business so much, but for an MNC, it might not be that impactful, right? So that was LO1 when we discussed it last week. For LO2, we discussed how employee communication and consultation for different types of organizations. So how, in a small business, employee communicate. In an MNC, it's really different because in an MNC, you might have someone working, here in the UK or someone working in India. And there's a time difference that needs to be kept in check. There's the mode of communication that needs to be kept in check. Usually Teams is something that they use. I think we discussed this as well in the learning outcome and how they manage that, because it's difficult. Also keeping in mind the culture is different, the working style is different, the expectations and outcome is different. So just refreshing your memory again, this is what we went through LO1 and LO2. For the assignment, essentially how you're going to approach it is that firstly, you need to select an organization of your choice. So here the suggestions say Zara, H&M, Next or M&S. So essentially the suggestion is any large scale fast fashion organization, okay? So as an assistant HR manager, employee working for the organization, you have been asked to apply the principles of employee relations and review the power and politics in your organization. So as I discussed up, you are an HR manager and you need to basically manage employees that are working under you, right? You're a people manager. How you apply different principles that are in an employee relation, in employee relationships, so that you can review the power and politics in the organization. I think I gave you an example of one place where I used to work previously, and how my manager used to tell me this line. She used to say, there is the actual way or the ethical way of doing things, and then my company name, it's the company's name of doing things. And I was like, what does that mean? And I gave an example in the last lecture that how I felt that a situation or an ER issue was managed unethically, but eventually that helps in the long-term business goal. So no one questioned her because, in the long term, that's going to be beneficial to the organization, right? So the steps she took was absolutely perfect for an organization's perspective. But the steps she took ethically as an HR person working, I felt was wrong. I mentioned how, she made that lady sign the contract, which was a non-disclosure agreement. And, maybe we could have approached it differently. Maybe we could have gone through the long route and actually, explained to her that, maybe we can't have a flexible working contract. She would have taken it to the union. It would have gone out of proportion again. Other people would have been involved. So this was the easier way of doing things, right? So as an HR manager, now you need to think, do you want to do the easier way, or do you would prefer doing the ethical way of things? Because sometimes when you're at a high position, there are few decisions that you need to make that you're thinking that, all right, if I do this, it's going to help the organization long term. It's going to support the organization's goals, right? We are a fast moving organization looking at just numbers. We're not looking at people's feelings. Or you can actually be, show some empathy and be like, you know what, we need to do it the right way. We need to show how, ER taking in all the various different employee relations issues that come up. We manage that correctly by using correct approaches. So for this, you need to make a report which basically covers all of the laws and designations in your organization. So, you know, in an organization, they can have, I gave an example, maybe it's, you know, a very formal organization, they have a dress code policy, okay? Whereas a small business might really not have a dress code policy, because in a small business, they would be like, or a startup, they would be like, you know what, you can come relax, dress however you want. That's absolutely fine. This is just one of the most basic laws that I'm mentioning. Obviously, there is disciplinary, there is, you know, a grievance issue, there is maternity, there's paternity. So there are different laws and designations that are put in place. Paternity is gotten so famous now because there are so many companies adapting to it. And I feel that's such a good step towards making sure that men in the organization also get a break when they're having, you know, when they're having a child. So you need to think about different laws that can be implemented in your organization, because it's going to be the organization of your choice, right? You know, you can pick up any organization. It can be the local vendor working, you know, down the corner of your road. Even you can take that, because that'll be a small business, right? That's how he operates. And you can be like, you know, that's how I want my business model to look like. Or you can take an example of an MNC and take it forward as well. So the report has to include contractual terms, terms of employment, and the impact of resignation on the development of human resources within the organization. So we mentioned, what does HR cover up, right? It takes care of all of the employment law, and, you know, you have a contract in place, you have terms of employment. So your report has to include all of that, and also include your impact on putting these different laws into place, and how it helps to manage people, and how it's beneficial for human resources within the organization. So your manager has asked you to report on the key contemporary trends for the organization, regionally and nationally. Okay, so this is something that your manager has asked you. So I mentioned, you are a people manager, you probably have 6 people under you. There might be 5 other people managers managing 6 people under them. Those 5 people managers report to someone higher to them in the hierarchy. And that's how it keeps going. So again, you are an HR manager, but your manager has asked you to report on the key contemporary trends of the organization, regionally and nationally. So contemporary trends can be, maybe you're talking about how COVID, yeah, it was a trend, how that has impacted someone in India working in an MNC, or someone in UK working in an MNC, right? So the impact of COVID in India probably was way worse compared to the impact of COVID, I don't know, in the US, because in India, it impacted labor class working people as well. So there were people on the streets, there were people, I don't know if you guys saw this video, it was a video of people being, you know, being sanitized. They were told to sit on the streets, and they were just throwing sanitizer in them. And I felt that was so inhuman. Like, you don't do that, right? So how COVID was managed probably, you know, in India, whereas in the US. So you need to make a report of the trends in the organization. A basic trend can be that, you know, employees are complaining that the IT system is not correct. You need to fix that. So that can be a trend that's going on in India and in the US. You know, both of these countries, the associates are telling you that IT is not correct, IT is not strong. So that's a trend as well. And the report must cover the rights of employees, the employers, and the various mechanisms for managing employment relationship. So, you know, as an employee, I told you, you have specific rights. You can go to the union. You can ask for flexible working. You can take sick days off. These are your basic rights. When, you know, you're pregnant, you can ask for a flexible working request and go for your appointments. Take your maternity leave properly. You don't have to come into work before 1 year, because you have proper time for your maternity leave. So these are rights as an employee, whereas rights as an employer would basically mean that, you know, if your employee is not working up to the mark, you can terminate them. If your employee is, you know, misbehaving, definitely grounds for termination. Employee who is not adhering to the policies that have been listed down in terms of disciplinary policy, or, you know, grievance policy, again, you can take them up and, you know, I mentioned last time, for example, a disciplinary policy might have different stages to that as well. So there are 4 different stages. It can be the first one, first warning, second warning. Third can be, action, like on your report, there might be an actual implication that will go. And the fourth is termination. So how keeping your laws that you made in place, as I mentioned before, you need to mention the laws, right? So keeping your laws or policies that you put in place for the organization, what rights do you have as an employer? And also the various, the mechanisms that you can manage the relationship. So, a disciplinary policy can be one of the mechanisms because you're keeping your employees in check. Anyone who misbehaves in the organization can be terminated, and that make sure that employees are kept in check, essentially, right? You need to include a range of specific organizations examples as well. So be creative, just give different examples, give different scenarios. Make sure that you're, I give so many examples throughout the different learning outcomes, right? So keep that in mind, and how it works in a business perspective is different than just reading in theory. Then you have to analyze how employment relationships in an organization, given in the scenario, are affected by development in society and work context. So how employment relationships essentially are affected by developments in society. So, for example, if an employee was contractually required to work in the office 40 hours a week, after COVID, how contractually that changes, and how does that affect the development in society? So development in society would essentially mean, COVID, for example. Or development in society can also be that there's something specific that's going on, and because of that, there have been changes to the organization and also how people work. Then examine the fundamentals of employment law applied to specific organizations, example given in the scenario. So how different laws that have been put in place or policies that you have been put in place for your organizations, again, give different examples. As I mentioned, two associates working in a call center, how the dispute started, how, they could have been managed in the first go. An associate not able to, I think I gave this example, someone who's not able to work hard, so you put them on a PDP, which is a personal development plan. It can also be called a PIP, which is a personal improvement plan. And make sure that as a manager, you're, supporting them and giving them those resources that, if you can do better, then definitely do. Just give me 1 second, guys. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, so let me share my screen again. I just stopped sharing it. All right. So that was the second task that you need to complete when you're doing or approaching your assignment. So for the third task, it would be you critically analyze and draw valid conclusions that impact the development in society and the work context on the employment relationships. For this, again, I'm always giving the example of COVID, but it can also be, last year was such a difficult time. There were so many people getting redundant. There were so many people losing their jobs. The job market did not have many options or opportunities for people to apply. New graduates were not getting a job because that was not happening. Sorry about. Sorry about that, guys. So yeah, this was task 3 that you have to do. For task 4, you have to design appropriate mechanisms for communicating and consulting with employees of different organizations. So, for example, if we are working in an MNC, all right? You have chosen your basically organization is an MNC. What you essentially have to do is how an MNC can approach, a small business to have business with them. So for example, if you're an MNC that sells, I don't know, your Paytm, how you guys have heard of Paytm, or you're an MNC that sells card machines, all right? So such an MNC needs to have business with every little organization, right? It can be a small vendor sitting down the street. It can be a small business, a family business wherein there are 4 people working in one little shop, needs a card machine, definitely, right? So how does an MNC have appropriate mechanisms for communicating with different organizations, and also how they work together, because their working style is very different from probably in how, a huge organization works, right? For the 5th task, you need to design and justify a range of appropriate communication and consultation mechanisms to facilitate employee voice and levels of engagement. So you need to basically have proper communication between your employer and the employee. So for example, I told you, your people manager is a very important person because they are the first line of contact for your employees. If your people manager is not a strong-headed person, your employees might be so lost and they'll feel, you know what, I'm not getting the best out of what I could in this job role. I feel I can do better, but I haven't been pushed more. I don't have the appropriate support from my manager. So how appropriate communication, and how, I gave an example how, if you have weekly 101s with your managers, how that can help so that they have proper communication between them, so they can help with employee voice and levels of engagement. So this was the table I was talking about in the start of this assignment discussion. So if you're looking at just a pass, you need to complete all of the sections that are mentioned in the, which starts from P. So P1, P2, and P3. We went through this in the task that basically I discussed. So for the first one, explaining you, analyze how employment relationships in specific types of organizations have been affected by developments in society and the work context. So this was covered in LO1. So you have different types of organizations. I think we covered 4 types of organizations in LO1. It was a small business, it was a gig economy, it was an MNC, and not able to remember the 4th one, but I think there were 4 in that presentation. Have a look through the presentation, refresh your memory. Also, there are notes that are available on Moodle, so that'll help you guys out. If you feel that you want to give a different type of organization, feel free to do that as well. You can play with the way you need to approach this assignment. That's absolutely fine. So that's when you're looking at the past, so that you will cover all of the P1, P2, P3. But if you're looking at getting a merit or a distinction, then apart from just analyzing how the employment relationship is in those type of organizations, you also see the developments that impact the societal developments outside. And for distinction, you basically draw conclusions that how the positive relationship has basically affected employee relations due to the developments in society and work context. So you just keep adding on to the same topic so that you basically are looking at getting a distinction. For the general assignment advice, I already spoke about this while explaining you the above ones. Just make sure that you're using proper referencing style, correct language, have a good language command and good language control, double line space, be clear with everything that you're presenting, highlight, the topics that you're talking about really properly and evidently so that, the assessor is not confused. Your word limit, it was 3,000. So you can go 10% over or under the limit. I told you this as well. And just make sure that it's your work and you're not submitting it, not using any other student's work. So this was the part 1 of the assignment brief or the discussion that we done. This covers learning outcome 1 and 2. I'm going to move on for the second part of the assignment discussion, or basically assignment number 2. Just give me a second while I pull that up. All right, I'm just going to go through the Gmail itself. All right, guys. So now coming to the assignment 2 of the unit 31, which is employee relations. For this, the assignment title is different stakeholders and the impact of employee relationship. This is what you're going to essentially focus on. The introduction and the aim remains similar to what we spoke in the previous assignment discussion. So it's going to be quick. I'm just going to skim through this. Again, how you are HR practitioners and managers and need to understand how employment relationships work and the issues that can arise in having a positive employee relation, right? So it's important that, you know, your line managers are the most important people. They need to foster a positive working relationship with their associates and keep and maintain that relationship throughout, because if there are cracks within that foundation, your associate is going to be like, you know what, I feel I don't have a proper rapport with my manager, or my manager doesn't understand that I need a flexible working request and he needs to approve that. I might look at, you know, different ways of, you know, getting them. So I might be like, you know what, I actually feel I'm not getting the best out of my job role. Let me look at different opportunities outside elsewhere. So to keep and not increase the turnover rate as well, this is really important, because as we mentioned in the different learning outcomes, increase in turnover leads to more money being spent on hiring, more money being spent on training of associates. When new associates come in, it at least takes them 3 months to settle down correctly. So that's why usually you have you know, your probation period of the first 3 months or the first 6 months in some companies actually. So it takes new associates a while to completely settle down and be accustomed to their job role. They need to be given the proper support and system. If you're hiring someone based on, say, you know, a good fit in the organization, then you need to make sure that you're looking at also them upskilling them. So you need to give them the proper, you know, resources for upskill. So this is what the introduction essentially goes through. We spoke about the general information in the previous assignment number 1. For this report, you need to have a minimum of 2,000 words that are covering the scenario. So make sure that for this one, it's 2,000. For the previous one, it was 3,000. Again, make sure you're referencing all of your work correctly. No plagiarism. We use a software called Turnitin. For your, the websites and reading lists are going to be slightly different. Actually, it looks very similar. Only the second one is different. So go through that as well. Make sure you're using appropriate and good sources for your referencing and not dodgy internet websites. All right, coming to what your scenario is and how you need to approach the different tasks. So LO3 was apply the negotiation skills to workplace disputes for effective conflict management. In LO3, we spoke about what conflict is. Conflict essentially means, you know, a problem between, say, the employer and the employee, or the manager and the employee, and not just what the conflict is, but also how you can resolve the conflict. So that is what conflict management essentially means. How you resolve it is the most crucial step, right? And then the LO4 was develop HR solutions for an organization's employee relationships approach practices in order to improve performance. So how you can come up with different approaches so that the end goal, basically pushing your associates to do better, motivating them to actually give the best, how can that be achieved? And essentially, you know, that's going to impact their performance, right? So for part 2 of the assignment, you can use selected organization of your choice. There are a few suggestions given. It's similar to the suggestions in the previous assignment. I would suggest that if you're using one organization in the previous assignment, use the similar one in this one, because it can be a continuation of your assignment, right? As an assistant HR manager, employee working for the organization, you have been asked to make justified conclusions and recommendations based on critical insights into the role of different stakeholders. Does anyone remember what stakeholders is? I spoke about stakeholders essentially are, so I put it in easier language, okay? What it essentially means that I spoke about how you have, 6 associates being managed by one manager, one people manager. That way you have 5 different people managers reporting to one higher manager. That way the hierarchy keeps going up. So a stakeholder essentially would be at the topmost level of the organization, the highest or the leadership level of the organization. Those would essentially be stakeholders. And why do they call them stakeholders? Okay, why can't they just call them leadership or, a higher person, something like that? Why stakeholders? So, for example, in MNCs, what happens is, when you are in such a high position, it can be that you are allocated shares. So you are been given company shares as bonus, all right? So because sometimes the company can't always afford to pay them the amount of money that they, deserve or expect. So they give them money essentially indirectly, but in terms of shares. It can be company shares, right? What's essentially going to happen is, as a company or as an MNC, you are growing because your shares are being allocated to someone. So essentially, indirectly in the books, all right, this is the amount of shares that have been sold. As a leader, what you can do is, when you get those shares, you can keep them and be like, you know what, let's wait for the right time to sell them off. Or you can just have them because, that's what's going to increase your stake in that organization. That's why you're called a stakeholder, because you play a major important part as well. For example, if a leader in an organization is unhappy, or the stakeholder essentially is unhappy, what he can actually do is he can sell them shares in a really low price, which indirectly, when you're looking from a financial perspective, is going to affect the organization long term. Because of the shares that are sold at a really low price, I would not go into finance of it, but it would affect the market rate as well. So that's why they call them stakeholders essentially. And it's very important to keep your stakeholders pleased. So how, different insights or recommendations coming from them need to make sure that, you're keeping that in mind. Because also, not saying that, if they're unhappy, everything's going to crash. But yeah, if they're unhappy, things might not flow the way they should flow. So you make recommendations based on critical insights into the role of different stakeholders and the broader impact of employee relationships. So you talk about how, maintaining a positive employee relationship is so important. Talk about how if you have a negative one, how it's going to impact the organization. So what does your report include? All right. You utilize negotiation skills to resolve workplace disputes, conflicts, and reflect these negotiation skills to discuss different management approaches. In LO3, we spoke about how conflict can be resolved, how different disputes arise. Gave you so many examples of disputes between associates and how it was managed well. So you talk about how important negotiation skills are crucial, because if you don't have good negotiation skills, then managing these disputes and conflict is going to get so difficult. Then evaluate the personal performance to identify strength and areas of further development. So make sure that you're also evaluating, a manager's personal performance, so that, you're seeing that, okay, if you're in a manager position, you're looking at their performance as well. You're making sure that they are been given, the proper resources to manage people properly. And if they need any improvement in, their, performance, or, just further areas of development, they've been provided that as well. Then assess the employee relationship approach and practices in an organization to develop HR solutions in order to improve performance. We spoke about this, how there are different ways you can approach a specific problem. As I gave you a very good example, ethical way, non-ethical way, can be different ways, right? As long as the end goal has been met, no one's going to question you. So that's how you also develop the different HR solutions, or essentially how HR approaches that specific task or that specific problem, which essentially would help to improve the organization's performance or the department's performance in a whole. So for example, for that example that I gave you, which was the unethical example, the call center department really did well, because after we let go of that lady, she was on a flexible working contract and she was not doing, what we expected her to do. We hired someone who was, way younger, who could give way more output compared to what she was given. So essentially helped, but was it the ethical way of doing it? Maybe not. Diverse HR solutions that address issues and challenges to improve performance. So just make sure that you have different HR solutions that can address, different kinds of problems. So as I mentioned this, when you're thinking about a specific policy, or when you're coming up with a specific law that's going to be applicable to your organization, you can't just bear in mind one single person. You need to see, so everyone works differently. Everyone's going through different phases in life. Probably there's someone who's just graduated and got done with university. For them, a maternity policy would not really be, the main focus, because, they're way too young. They don't want to get pregnant now. Whereas someone who is, in their mid-30s, for them, a maternity policy would be really crucial, because they are looking to start a family and they would want the support from the organization, right? There can be someone who's 55 and working in an organization, and for them, healthcare would be one of the benefits that an organization gives. Good healthcare system, good support when it comes to healthcare. They have private healthcare that they provide. So that's going to be their incentive to join the organization. Whereas someone who's probably in their mid-20s, for them, the incentive would be hybrid working, good work-life balance. That's just good examples that have been given. So that's how you address all of the issues and not just a single person's issue. And keep in mind, different cultures, different problems that come up as well, different age groups. And the last task is provide justified HR solutions and recommendations for improving an organization-employee relationship strategy and practices in order to improve performance. So how correct HR solutions are put in place, and the recommendations that you're given are probably justified, because if you don't do that, then you're essentially using the unethical way. And in the long run, it's going to catch up with you essentially, because someone might actually know that, I know my rights. I can go to the union. I can stop this. I'm not going to be forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So recommendations for improving an organization's employee relationship strategy and practices in order to improve performance. End goal is always improving performance, or looking at organization's growth, or, just profitable in the future. That's what the end goal always would be. For this one, again, pass, merit, distinction. If you're looking at just pass, make sure that you're covering all of the topics under the P. If for this one, it's P4, 5, and 6. Whereas if you're looking at a merit or a distinction, give appropriate examples and provide enough information that you get a distinction, and make sure that you're covering all of these little bits that are mentioned over here properly. So it explains clearly what you need to put inside your assignment so that you get this specific grade. Again, general assignment advice. We went through this. Use correct language control. Make sure that your work is clear, not confusing, properly double line space so that, the work is properly read by your assessor. You can go 10% over or under the limit. So for this assignment, it's 2,000 words. So 2,000 words, 10% over or under, 200 over or under. And make sure that it's your own work. So guys, this was the end of both the assignment briefs and discussion. I am going to end this lecture here unless you guys have any other questions for me. So thank you so much, guys. Take care. Have a nice day. Bye.